We are in Mark chapter 15. We'll be reading from verse 40 on to chapter 16, verse 8. There were also some women looking on from a distance, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James the Less and Joseph and Salome. When he was in Galilee, they used to follow him and minister to him, and there were many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. When evening had already come, because it was the preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea came, a prominent member of the council, who himself was waiting for the kingdom of God. And he gathered up courage and went in before Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Pilate wondered if he was dead by this time, and summoning the centurion, he questioned him as to whether he was already dead. And ascertaining this from the centurion, he granted the body to Joseph. Joseph bought a linen cloth, took him down, wrapped him in a linen cloth, and laid him in a tomb which had been hewn out in the rock, and he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, were looking on to see where he was laid. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might come and anoint him. Very early on, the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. They were saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, although it was extremely large. Entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting at the right, wearing a white robe, and they were amazed. And he said to them, "Do not be amazed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who has been crucified. He is risen. He is not here. Behold, here is the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had gripped them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
Father in heaven, we can come before your throne because of what our sinless Savior did. He paid the price that what separated us from you would be removed, that we might be brought to you and know the hope of glory and be enabled to believe and to tell of the great things that you have done in your Son. Help us worship you and follow you in Christ more because we've heard your word today. Make your book live and us taught today. In Jesus' name, amen. I was looking at the passage and thinking about what these people did that we read about by burying Jesus, and thinking about what's the difference between honoring a dead person versus honoring a living person. And someone you admire or love has died. There's a deep sorrow, a deep loss, and out of respect for the person and out of the care that you had for them, and even acknowledging that they're made in the image of God, you treat the corpse with dignity and you honor it. You understand that this is a creation of God, but there's still an appropriate mourning because we understand that death is a curse. It's a result of the fall, and it's an enemy, and we know that God created us to live forever, but because of sin, the man that was created out of ashes goes back to ashes again, even though the Spirit lives on. And we can admire the memory of them, but there aren't any new memories made. The honoring is looking past, and the loss is ever present. But a living person isn't the same. When we honor them, it's not just honoring a memory, but it's a present admiration. They're still there. You don't have to mourn loss, but you can delight in a presence. You can value the person. You can listen to what they say, and you can revere their speech. I was thinking about this because our passage today is about people who are going to honor the dead. They don't actually understand that he's living when they go to take care of his corpse. As far as we're going today, we're just ending where Wayne read to verse 8. And it ends with these women finding that the tomb is empty and being told that he's risen. And they flee and they tell no one. There's a definitive break here in the text, and regardless of what we know about what happened after this section ends with them bewildered and telling nobody. Now, what if Mark ended the gospel right here? What would he be trying to tell us? And yes, we have the other gospel accounts. We have Matthew and Luke and John, and with Mark, if we weave them all together, we get a fuller picture of what actually happened surrounding Jesus' death and resurrection. And today we're going to try and stick mostly with the Gospel of Mark and what his emphasis is, even though we'll bring in some of the details from the other Gospels. And we look at it like when you have a lawsuit and there's a trial and you have many different witnesses, they each can tell it from their perspective. They bring in different emphases, they highlight different things, they summarize different ways and details. And while they don't necessarily contradict, they bring in different aspects. And if we weave that together, we understand what actually happened. And that's what we have here. We have everything that God intended for us. And they all record some basic facts, that Jesus died on a cross, he was buried, and he was placed in a tomb. And the tomb was sealed with a stone, and on the third day, the tomb was empty, and a messenger explained that he had risen. But again, what if Mark's gospel ended here? Well, what's his point? And this isn't just a hypothetical question, because many think that Mark does end right here in verse 8. If you look in your Bibles, verses 9 through 20 are probably in brackets in most of your translations, or there's some marginal note explaining that these verses don't appear in the most ancient manuscripts. And we'll talk about this next week, how we should think about that. What should we think about these types of things? And we'll take it as an opportunity to understand a little bit about how we got our Bible and why we should trust that we have an accurate representation of God's Word, even though we don't have the original autographs that were written by the authors. But for now, what has Mark accomplished up to verse 8? He's very much expressing something when he says, they went out afraid and they spoke to no one. Well, just up to this point, on one hand, we understand that Mark's probably made the point that he set out to do. He's been concerned with demonstrating that Jesus is the Son of God. I know we've gone back to verse 1 of chapter 1 a few times as we've been talking this last week, but he set out to show that this is the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And he begins identifying him as the Son of God, and then he spends the epistle or the book basically backing up that claim. But he also says that if you're looking at it, what's it say in verse 1:1? It says, it's not just the gospel of Jesus Christ. What's it say? It's the beginning of the gospel. It's just the beginning. It's not all of it. He's established that Jesus is the Son of God. He came for a purpose. He came to give his life as a ransom. He would die is what he kept teaching. He would rise again. And that's where it ends, that he rose again. That's been done. He's established the foundation for our faith, the death and the resurrection of Christ. That is what the gospel is explained at. So on one hand, he's accomplished that by showing the empty tomb. But on the other hand, we see that the disciples, up to this point, don't get it. They don't understand the gospel. They don't understand why he had to die. They don't even understand, they don't even believe initially about the resurrection. And there's an important point to understand just from this, just from looking as far as we've come. That the gospel, first of all, doesn't depend on the faithfulness of the disciples. It depends on what God has done. What he's done in Christ, his death and resurrection. It's the beginning because the story continues, proclaiming his death and resurrection and the significance of that. And it's so interesting to note, as we see the history go on of the early church going into the book of Acts, every time we see the proclamation of the gospel, it always includes the death and the resurrection. It's not left out. It's like two wings on an airplane. They go together, and you can't have one without the other. So, we're left with an open question here as we come to that. Will others enter into not just seeing that a man died, but will they understand and embrace the good news that there is a risen Son of God? At the end of verse 8, they go out, and will he be proclaimed? Will Jesus be honored as the Son of God who lives now? Or will he be honored just as a man who lived and died? Will he even be honored at all? And more importantly, will his followers live in the power of the resurrection, or will they live in fear? This week, we look at the women followers of Jesus and Joseph of Arimathea honoring Jesus in his death, and we see the women's discovery of the empty tomb. And we want to look at how do they experience Jesus' death and resurrection. And we're just going to step through the scenes of the passage here. We're going to see women observing from a distance. We're going to see a prominent man who buries with courage. The women coming to honor him, and finally them fleeing in fear. And with them, we don't want to stay in a position where we believe something about Jesus but live in fear. And the only way not to stay in fear and to live in the boldness of proclamation like we see in the book of Acts, when these apostles, once they're restored, will boldly proclaim Christ in front of leaders and kings. The only way that we can get that type of boldness is from seeing Jesus not just as a memory, not just of something that he did in the past, but one who lives now, one who sends his Spirit, one who enables and will come again and will bring his people into glory. But Mark ends in this verse with a question that we need to reflect on. So let's start going through this as we look at verse 40. The women are there from a distance. Now they had just witnessed from this distance Jesus breathing his last and crying out. He's given up his life. He's accomplished what he said, giving his life a ransom for many. He was forsaken, he said, for you and for me. If you've believed in him, he took the wrath for sin. And there was this amazing testimony. The women probably couldn't hear it from where they were at, but the testimony of this pagan centurion, he came to see something about Jesus and Jesus' death, that he was the Son of God. It was the first confession we saw last week of any human who acknowledged Jesus for who he truly was as the Son of God. And then Mark switches scenes from the foot of the cross to these women observing from a distance, from this Gentile confession to the Jewish women who had been with him since he was in Galilee, it says. There's no comment here about the apostles, the disciples that he selected and made special appointments as apostles. These were the ones, remember, that in the upper room they swore that they would be with him until death. They were willing to die with him. But they're not there. But we see that not all have totally forsaken Jesus. These were the ones who were there in the beginning. They heard his teaching. They saw his miracles in Galilee and other places. They saw the evidences that Mark has been giving us about his teaching, his authority, his works. They've seen all that, And they were ones, it says, verse 41, that also ministered to him. We don't know all the details. Maybe they were helping provide meals and care for the whole group. And you have a picture of those who were loyal to Jesus. They hadn't left him still. You see, Mary Magdalene here. She wasn't just someone who saw miracles from afar. This is one who had experienced it herself. This is the one who had evil spirits cast out, or 7 demons that Jesus liberated her from. I was thinking about all the healings that Jesus did over the course of the Gospel of Mark, where crowds were coming, and many probably just received their healing, joyful, went home and lived on their own. But this one is one who stayed with Jesus. I think when Jesus said those who are forgiven much love much. And here's one who was delivered much. And she stayed with Jesus. There's another Mary here whose children, James and Joseph, were probably well known in the early church. And James might even be one of the 12. Some think it might be the son of Alphaeus. And then there was Salome, the mother of the sons of Zebedee, we learn from another gospel. This is the mother of James and John. And there were others watching too. Apparently at the time of Passover, they had come down to the feast and were with this group of onlookers. And it's interesting because prior to the crucifixion and burial, there's been nothing to say in the Gospels that Jesus had any women followers at all. But we understand now what was behind the scenes. There were many who saw something in who Jesus was. And Mark focuses on these particular women who had been faithful followers. And they surface now as the prime witnesses to the central truths and events of what we ground the Christian faith on, the death and resurrection. They're here, they're witnesses to his death, and they're going to be, as we saw in the passage here, the ones who will see his burial and know its location, and they're going to be the ones who see the empty tomb and testify that he was risen. Now, from a Jewish mindset from the Old Testament, when you have a testimony, you always needed 2 or 3 to validate a testimony. And here you have 2 or 3 and even more. But also in that culture, it's pretty unique to have women who are the ones who are making these types of testimonies. It just shows kind of the authenticity of the documents, because surely in the first century they wouldn't make up that women were the first ones to testify of these facts at all. So we understand from this that women weren't excluded from the ministry of Jesus, from faithfulness and belief. But it doesn't mean that they have full understanding of his ministry either. Up to this point, it seems no one's had understanding of his ministry. They observed at a distance. They cared about what happened to their master. I think of Peter, where he's saying, "Where should we go, Lord? You have the words of eternal life." And here they are. Where should they go? The master who they've been following around since the beginning in Galilee is gone. Their hope of salvation in the kingdom, what was going on in their hearts? Where will they go? But then we see a shift. Maybe a bit of a surprise. There's another follower. Now here we had the women who had openly followed Jesus before, but now are at a distance. But now we learn of a man who was at a distance before, and now he comes into the open. This man named Joseph, originally from a place called Arimathea. We have Mark identifying him right away as a prominent member of the council. You know what council this is? This is the Sanhedrin. Yeah, this is the Sanhedrin who condemned Jesus, who were scheming together, plotting how they might kill him, to take him out of the way. They were the ones who had the mock trial, and they condemned him of blasphemy, and they turned him over to the Gentiles and accused him before Pilate. And now we have this prominent member, and prominent, we learned from the other account that Matthew says he's a rich man. Of course, most of those guys on the council were probably rich men, but prominent, they have some status which has usually wealth associated with it. And Mark is showing this guy is a very unlikely candidate to show some kind of honor towards this dead Jesus. He's already done that a little bit. Remember the kind of the surprise that we saw before with this pagan centurion proclaiming that he was the Son of God. And now we see women included. And now this unlikely person of a member of the enemy council coming to ask for the body of Jesus to bury it. Now what was going on with his motives? At one level, Jews had certain scruples about burying the dead. Romans, they didn't have any qualms about just leaving a corpse hanging on the cross for days and letting the elements and the weather and birds pick at it. They didn't have any problems with that. But the Jews, they believed it was a sacred obligation to bury the dead, even their enemies, even criminals. This comes from Old Testament teaching. We see in Deuteronomy 21 where even for a criminal it says, his body shall not remain overnight, but you shall bury him the same day, because it defiles the land otherwise. We see another instance of honoring. We remember when King David in the Old Testament, after he became king, Saul had been taken, his body had been taken by the enemies. He had killed himself in battles because he was already wounded. And David praised valiant men who went into enemy territory to recover the body of Saul. And David says, may you be blessed by the Lord because you showed this loyalty to Saul, your Lord, and buried him. It showed loyalty. It preserved the land to honor the corpses of the dead. And even the religious leaders had a sense for this type of caring for the bodies of any Jew that was left out for dead. We see this sense of duty in the Gospel of John where the religious leaders, they actually took steps to assure the removal of bodies before sunset. Remember, they wanted to have the other criminals, the legs broken so that they would be able to be taken down before sunset. They had this understanding, even for criminals and their enemies. And of course, the Romans, they would have conceded to these Jewish sensitivities. So on one hand, there might be that going on, but there's more going on with Joseph than just Jewish scruples, just the duty to take care of the dead. And Mark tells us two things which point to that. First, this Joseph is one who is waiting for the kingdom of God and one who had to gather up courage to ask for the body. And the first one, he was waiting for the kingdom of God. This is a comment on someone who's pious, a pious Jew who has hope in the coming one. We think about the birth narrative when they took Jesus to the temple, and we think of Simeon and Anna, and they had this hope of the restoration of Israel. They were looking forward to something. And when it says he was waiting for the kingdom, it's such a contrast what we've seen with some of the religious leaders. Usually you hear Jesus talking about the religious leaders as ones who were seeking praise for themselves, or they had their own status and vested interest in the temple proceedings. That was their motivation. But here's one who's actually looking for God's promises to come to pass. His view is lifted off the horizon towards what God has promised before them. Then it says, he took courage. Now, why did he need courage? It's in the sense that he dared, he mustered it up to go ask for the body. And I don't think it took courage to be mustered up just to perform a burial duty. In his heart, he was honoring Jesus. And it took some risk, because honoring someone who's been accused of blasphemy by your peers and of treason by the government that's over you, in the midst of all those people, day in and day out with them, well, he could be looked upon as sympathizing with that person. It could even earn the same fate. I mean, you think about the rest of the people on the council, Joseph's associates. They despised Jesus, and certainly his death didn't change that. That would just confirm them in their thinking that this one who claimed to be Messiah has nothing to do with the kingdom of God. He's nobody. You shouldn't believe anything. But Joseph doesn't despise him. Instead, he seeks to respect him. We know that that's his heart because the other Gospels tell us a little bit more about Joseph, corroborating what we infer from Mark here. John says that Joseph was actually a disciple of Jesus, although a secret one. Somehow he had seen something about Christ, but he was afraid of the Jews. It took courage to step out. Luke called him a righteous man who had not consented with the council and their plans against Jesus. So as they were saying crucify him, somehow he wasn't agreeing to that. Now we don't know if he just wasn't absent that night or maybe he had just abstained from whatever the shouts were or however they took roll of those things or maybe he did say something. We don't know. It just says that he didn't consent to that. Whatever it was, he had come to believe something about this Jesus. Now, he certainly wouldn't have understood the resurrection. As we said, no one seemed to, but maybe he sees him more like a prophet of old. Certainly in the Old Testament, it wasn't uncommon for spokesmen for God, for prophets, to be killed by the religious leaders. Jesus talked about that. Is there not a prophet that you haven't killed? And here in the Old Testament, you had men of God who spoke for God, who were rejected by the religious leaders. Maybe Joseph had a sense this was going on. This man was a prophet of God. Remember, Nicodemus had that sense too. He was on the council, right? He came to him by night, and we know that the works you do say something that you're a man from God. And of course, in his burial, from John's account, we know Nicodemus actually helped Joseph as well. But whatever it was now, in Jesus' death, it moves Joseph to come forward, move to boldness. His death had some impact on Joseph, such that he's willing to take a risk and even give of his own expense. Here Mark tells us that he bought a linen cloth so that he could be wrapped in. And we also know that even the tomb that he was laid in from the other Gospels, we know that it was his own tomb. It was a own tomb. It was brand new. It was hewn, probably for his own family. And he's willing to actually handle a corpse. That would make him ceremonially unclean. And it's the Sabbath coming up. It's actually the feast that's going on here. And it doesn't stop him. He wants to honor Jesus. So he goes to Pilate. Pilate's willing to go along, but his concern, is he really dead? So he calls the centurion, and of course, what we learned last week, centurions, they were experts in death. They knew life from death. And there's no record of anyone ever surviving a crucifixion. These guys knew how to make sure they were dead. So it is not reasonable to think that Jesus is anything but dead when the centurions are done with him. And Pilate grants the corpse to Joseph. Now, if he hadn't, Jesus probably would have just ended up in some common grave where the other criminals, probably the other two thieves, wherever they were put, would have just ended up there. And Joseph doesn't want to see that. So he lays him in a tomb that can be secured. Not a tomb of a poor person, not just some cave, but a hewn tomb that is different from how we bury, right? We have coffins, we lower them into the ground. A rich man's tomb would have been hewn into the limestone hillside around Palestine, and they would have had like a little shelf cut into it so that you could lay a body on it, and there would have been a large disc-shaped stone that you could roll in a little channel to cover the front of the opening. And so that's where Joseph's going to put the corpse. He takes Jesus' body down, he wraps him and buries him in a rich man's tomb. And whether unwittingly or not, he's part of the fulfillment of Scripture we see in Isaiah 53:9, where Jesus, the suffering servant, was assigned to the grave with the wicked, but was with the rich in his death. He would have ended up with the wicked, but instead he was in his own tomb. And the women, verse 47, were watching. They were witnesses to where he was buried. And they seek to honor him too as we go into chapter 16. They had bought spices at some point, and this was probably Saturday night after the Sabbath. The Sabbath ends around dusk at 6 p.m., and then markets would open after the Sabbath. So after the Sabbath, they went and bought some of these spices. And they didn't buy it because they thought he was going to be raised from the dead. They bought it because they knew he had died. And they have no expectation of a resurrection. They might have loved him, but they didn't believe him. They didn't remember his teaching that he said he would rise again after 3 days. Their mindset, like we said, is more likely just sadness and agonizing pain. They'd started to do what loved ones do. Loved ones honor. They honor the dead. They honor the memory of those who were dear to them. And I was thinking of what like family did, and you remember Jesus' teaching when his mother and other relatives came looking for him. And Jesus looks out, and he spreads his arms out to the disciples. And we know that includes women. And he said, "Who's my mother and my brothers? These. Those who do the will of my Father are my brother and sisters and mother." There's something about those who are like-minded, joined to Christ together as our head, that we have a kinship that is like family. And here they are with their master. No one ever taught like this one, with authority and wisdom, not to mention the restoration and healing that he brought. They're drawn to the tomb by their loyalty to Jesus, their love for him, and they're just determined to render this last service to their master and just privately mourn him. Seems they wanted to do it as soon as possible. They couldn't have done it on the Sabbath, on Saturday, because they're not supposed to work, they're not supposed to travel, so they'd have to wait until after the Sabbath. So now as we go into 16:1 and 2, we're at the dawn of the first day of the week, Sunday. And they're trying to be there at first light, and it's been 3 days since he's been buried. And in a Jewish reckoning, any part of a day would count as a day. His body was in the tomb on Friday. Remember, he died around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and Joseph was trying to get him in before the Sabbath began, before that day ended at sunset, which would be around 6 in the evening. So he was in the tomb on Friday, and then all on the Sabbath from sunset Friday evening till sunset Saturday evening was a full day, the whole Sabbath. And then as the Sabbath would end on around 6 p.m. on Saturday, any time after that would be part of the first day of the week, part of a third day. And then, verse 2, very early on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. Seems like it's just the women. Apparently, none of the men disciples were there. They weren't there to help. Who's going to roll the stone away? Maybe in their grief they didn't think about it. Or maybe they expected maybe some others would come. Or maybe they thought they'd find some workers there. Apparently they weren't aware that guards had been put there by Pilate at the requests of the chief priests, and that they had put a seal on the tomb. That's what we learn in Matthew. And Matthew also tells us that there was a great earthquake, and there was an angel that came in dazzling garb that just shook the guards to terror, and he's the one that rolled the stone away. And he didn't roll it away to let Jesus out. This is when he's resurrected. Remember, he can appear through locked doors. He doesn't need someone to let him out. The stone was rolled away to let people see that he wasn't there anymore. And this angel had rolled the stone away, and the guards just passed out in terror. That's what we learn in Matthew. And apparently, by the time these women arrive, the soldiers had come to, and they're making their way to the chief priest to figure out how they're going to deal with this story and what happened. So the soldiers are gone. The stone's rolled away. That's what the women see. And as we go to verse 5, we see the alarm that they experience. They go in and they see what Mark describes as a young man sitting there wearing a long white robe. And that's not typical of what young men would wear. And Luke says it was dazzling apparel. Matthew comes right and says it's an angel. This is a messenger from God. When there's usually an encounter with a human with something heavenly, what's a typical response? Frightened. Like we see Daniel when he gets visited by an angel, that he's frightened and he falls on his face. You can bet they're amazed, as it says here. Actually, the ESV is better. They were alarmed. It's a sense of distress. Luke says they were terrified, bowing to the ground. And then this messenger spoke words of comfort. Don't be alarmed. And he says, don't be afraid. I've got a message for you. You came looking for Jesus. I have some good news. And he identifies Jesus as the one who was crucified. You see that? You're seeking him. The one who's crucified, one who experienced a shameful death, a horrible death. And he's the Nazarene, Jesus the Nazarene. Nazareth, that was someone that he was ridiculed before. Nazareth was despised. Someone was saying, what good can come out of Nazareth? Do you remember? He can't be the Messiah, can he? No. This one who underwent such extreme humiliation, such a scandalous death, for the sake of his people. He underwent the wrath of God, and even though the women didn't understand that, this one who had undergone that shame, the message is, he's alive. Literally, he has been raised. And of course, who raised him? God raised him. It's all God's work. The very one who was forsaken by God is now shown to be accepted by God. God is validating not just his sacrifice. It was finished on the cross. His sacrifice was sufficient for all who would believe him. All the sins would be paid. The resurrection showed that God accepted that, but also it shows that all his teachings, all his claims were accepted too. All his promises. And this would be huge. If he actually made the claims that he did and he wasn't God, he was guilty of blasphemy. He claimed to forgive sins. He claimed that he was the Messiah, the Son of God, and he would come sitting on the right hand of power. And the religious leaders, they would have been right to condemn him as a blasphemer for saying the things that he did. Leviticus 24 says, the one who blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. And by God raising him, he's saying he's not a blasphemer. He's saying, similar to what he said with words from heaven when he was baptized, he says, yes, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And the angel says, he's not here. He's not in the place of defeat and death. If he was defeated, he would still be on this hewn shelf in the tomb. But look, he's not there. What a truth. His death wasn't in vain. Everything he said would happen was happening. But he's not done. The messenger has more to say. Remember, this is the beginning of the gospel. And Jesus had more to say. And the messenger, he doesn't stop in the fact that he just died. He doesn't stop with the fact that he just rose. He says, go. Go tell his disciples and Peter. He's going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. You see, because there's more to do. Remember, he told you he would die and rise again. At the Last Supper, he told them something more too. Back in Mark chapter 14, Jesus said, you're all going to fall away. All of you. But then he goes on and says, but after I have been raised, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. You're all going to fail, but I'm going to go ahead of you. Even then, he's saying, you will fail, but it won't stop me from doing what I came to do. I will come to you. I will go to Galilee. And they had all run away. They had all denied him. They were in their sorrow and shame at this point. Their world too was shattered. Probably none more so than Peter, who had denied him, remember, 3 times and went out and wept bitterly. And the Lord, through this messenger and through these women, has a word for them. Go tell them. Go tell my disciples, even Peter. Make sure you tell Peter. Jesus had fed his flock through the years. He laid down his life for them, which led to their being scattered. But he's coming to regather them. He is a reconciling Savior for fallen sinners who are weak and fail. And this is not the end. The focus isn't on the tomb. It's empty. The focus is on the new quest. Actually finishing what he started. He's actually saying, go back, remember, to Galilee, go back to where I called you to be fishers of men. Remember, that's how we started. And we're not done. This gospel of this death and resurrection, what I came to do, is yet to be proclaimed. That's what you're going to fish for men with. So go and tell them. So will they tell them? Will the disciples go to Galilee? Mark knows the outcome. We know the outcome. The original readers knew the outcome. But Mark ends this section saying they fled in fear. Terror and bewilderment gripped them. They can't even process what's going on. They're in awe. And they say nothing to anyone because they were afraid. At this point, we're left with the impression that as long as they remain afraid, they're not going to tell anyone. What a poignant point. Is that an appropriate place to stop? What would Mark be saying if he did? And he does say this. He stops there. He makes a point that they're afraid and they tell no one. This isn't really new for what Mark has been doing in his Gospels, showing us about Jesus' work and the people's response. Mark describes some amazing things that Jesus did, and then he describes how it left the witnesses and was always left in fear and amazement. When he calms the storm, the disciples afraid. Who is this? When he casts out a legion of demons out of a man, they're very frightened. As they head to Jerusalem, they have this fear. When he walks on water, they're terrified. At the transfiguration, it says, greatly afraid. And Mark moves from event to event, from teaching to teaching, and all throughout you see that Jesus leaves people astonished, afraid, amazed, in fear. And this is true of his disciples. Mark has presented no model disciples in his gospel. They all falter. None of them fully get what he was all about. Not the men, not the women, not Joseph. So at this point, we go back to what we said in the beginning. The good news doesn't rest on what the disciples do, but on what the Lord has done. It rests on what the centurion came to see, that Jesus is the Son of God, who finished the work and rose again. Will they believe? Will we believe? Not just as someone who died, but will you believe that he's risen? Well, Mark's original audience, probably written to Rome when persecution either is there or is soon coming, what will they do? Will they cling to a risen Lord that they haven't seen? Will they be faithful when persecution comes? Or will they keep quiet and live in fear? Do they just have a dead teacher? Or do they have a risen Lord who will be with them and enable them and give them hope? Is that how we'll live? When persecution comes, when we get mocked and reviled for the sake of the name. So many, we can struggle with this. What a hard time for someone we can't see. The disciples, they're almost like the mockers at the cross. See and won't believe, right? If you come down from the cross, show us. We'll see and believe. And these disciples, you know what? We know the rest of the story. They didn't believe until they saw. The women, they finally did tell, actually after they saw Jesus too. They went back and they told the disciples, and it seemed like nonsense to them. They didn't believe it. And they didn't go to Galilee. It took a while for them to get to Galilee. It actually took Jesus coming to them in Jerusalem a few times before they would go to Galilee. You remember doubting Thomas. He wasn't with them when Jesus first appeared in the locked room to the disciples. And Thomas says, unless I put my fingers in his nail wounds, I won't believe either. And Jesus finally comes to him, and Thomas goes, my Lord, my God. And what's Jesus say? Do you believe because now you've seen me? But blessed are those who haven't seen and yet believed. That's all of Mark's audience in Rome. It's all of us. But just seeing isn't enough. Faith isn't just a matter of seeing something. It's not a matter of vision with my eyes. It's a matter of the heart. And believing all that God says about what we've seen or heard about. What He's spoken in His Word. When we have real faith, we're actually believing what God says about what He says is really there. For instance, Thomas's doubt didn't change the reality of Jesus' resurrection, did it? Just because he didn't believe it doesn't mean it wasn't real. And when he saw it, it didn't change the fact either. He was there before, he's still there. And we can honor Jesus in all sorts of ways. But if we don't truly believe what he taught as reality, we don't have the kind of faith that is needed to give us endurance for the type of boldness that lives in a world which opposes him. So on the one hand, the gospel is something that God has done, but the gospel is something to be believed. What would finally dispel their fear, such they would have the kind of boldness that we see in the book of Acts? I mean, when Jesus was raised, why wasn't it just like Lazarus being raised? Is there something different? Yes. Lazarus was raised, showing who Jesus was. But Jesus was raised because He is the living Lord. He is the Son of God. And they needed two things before they would have this boldness. First, they needed the Holy Spirit to come and enable them, empower them to speak boldly. But they also needed understanding of what to speak. They needed to understand, what is the significance? Why did Jesus have to die? Why is He raised again? We have a living Lord. So they didn't have this understanding just when they saw Him. So what did Jesus do? He opened up the scriptures to them. He showed them all that God had said. And He opened their minds to understand about his death, his resurrection, and the coming kingdom, and that it was necessary that he should die and rise again. And his teachings made sense. You see, because faith comes by hearing, and hearing of the word of Christ. Not just seeing. And blessed are all those who haven't seen yet believe. Because this is what God has said is real. I think of Peter, who had seen the risen Lord, and now he's writing in 1 Peter chapter 1 to believers who haven't. And he says, though you have not seen him, you love him. And though you do not see him now, yet believe in him, you greatly rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory. Not because he's a dead man, but because he's a risen Lord. And the very power that raised him from the dead is keeping for them an imperishable, incorruptible, unfading inheritance in heaven. And they understand it. And they rejoice. Even though, as Peter says, they're now being grieved by various trials. They haven't seen him, but they know they will. Because God has promised it. He has promised it. And that can cast out fear and give boldness. Jesus' words have been fulfilled to the letter and everything that's happened to this point. And we know that everything will be. And the resurrection just begins the gospel, as we said. It sets into motion the story that's not yet finished. And we have the baton now. It's been passed on to us. Will we be silent in fear? Or we look to him, our risen Lord, and be strengthened by him and go and tell. Because the gospel, yes, it's something that he's done. It's something to believe, but it's also something to be told. And without the resurrection, without eternal life, we're going to tend to want our pleasures in the here and now. We want to make this our heaven. And so we're going to avoid risk. We're going to avoid difficulty. We're going to avoid discomfort. And so we will be cautious and timid about how we honor the Lord. But you bring in the reality of the resurrection, and that shapes our hopes. The resurrection doesn't mean that we'll never stumble. But it means that he's always there, and he intercedes for us before the Father, always applying his work to us, and he's always there to hear, even now. Because he's raised, we will be raised too. That's the hope of resurrection. It means that you don't need to fear death if you've trusted in him, if you have him as your Lord, because he's overcome it. The sting of death is sin. And he came to conquer death because he removed sin. He paid the penalty. And God gives us victory over death through Christ, who loved us and through what he's done. So Mark's gospel is not about the disciples' greatness. It's about the power of God. The power that raised him from the dead. And the one that he sends through his Spirit to us. So let's live our lives, not just embracing half the story, not just his death, but live in light of Christ's resurrection. Not just one who takes away sin, that's huge, but also who's one who is with you, who strengthens you and helps you and promises to bring you to glory. His presence forever, to bring us to God. And go tell that Jesus is the Son of God. Father, help us not just to speak boldly as we ought, but to have the foundation which enables us to speak boldly, that we have such a vision of the hope of glory in your Son, and know your presence in him day by day. Help us not to grow weary, but run this race with endurance. The prize set before us in Jesus Christ. In his name we pray. Amen.